Little Wolf and Mother Wolf. Mother Wolf was a magnificent animal. She had all the traits of a terrific hunter. She was very strong and fast. She knew how to hide and how to seize prey. Mother Wolf was the forest's supreme creature. Her skills were evident to all the other animals. Mother Wolf lived in a den beneath a tree with her cub, Little Wolf. At dawn, Little Wolf and Mother Wolf were eating breakfast. Little Wolf looked sad. Mother Wolf said, "What is wrong, my cub?" Little Wolf said, "I want to be big like you. You can run and leap better than anyone. You can howl so loudly. Being big is a necessity, and I am so small." Mother Wolf said, "Don't be dissatisfied with your size. Being small can be very helpful sometimes." Just then, rain and hail began to fall. The tree was hit by lightning. It fell on the wolf's den. Little Wolf was scared. The wolves knew that escaping the den was vital. Mother Wolf said, "Little Wolf, I cannot move the heavy pile of branches, but you can escape with ease. You can get out and find help." Little Wolf crawled out of the den and called all the large animals for help. They went to the den and pulled away the branches. Mother Wolf came out and said, "Thank you, Little Wolf. You saved my life." She softly squeezed Little Wolf and kissed her. Little Wolf smiled. She said, "Mother, this outcome has taught me a profound lesson. Even though I'm small, I'm still important."
The Old Man with a Bump. An old man had a large bump on his face. He went to the best physician in town. He gave the old man tragic news. "I can't do anything. You'll have to get accustomed to it." One day the old man went into the forest. Suddenly the light became dim. It was going to rain. So he found a hollow tree to sit under. It leaked a little, but there was no other place he could wait. When the rain stopped, his joints felt stiff from sitting. Suddenly, he heard a tune coming from far away. Many fables said monsters lived in the forest. No one could affirm that the stories were true, though. Still, his instincts told him that there was something out there. He walked farther into the forest. Then he saw a fire glowing. He was astonished to see a clan of monsters. They were having a great feast and banging on drums. He stood behind a tree, spying on them. Then the leader asked, "Who's the best dancer here?" "Me," the man yelled, coming from behind the tree. He started to dance. When he was finished, the leader said, "I want you to dance every night. In order to make sure you return, I'm going to keep something you love." "Please don't take my bump," he begged. "I can't sacrifice it. It's good luck," he exclaimed, pointing at it for emphasis. The monsters agreed that they had to take his bump. After they did, the man stroked his face to make sure it was gone. He had tricked them. He never went back, and he never had to worry about his bump again.
The circus. Ben was unhappy. He lived on a ranch near a small town, and he didn't have many friends. Then one day, a messenger came to the ranch. He showed the headline in the town newspaper. The circus was coming to the town. It even coincided with Ben's birthday. Ben was very excited as his father steered the car through the town. The circus couldn't accommodate all the people who wanted to see the show, but Ben had a ticket. Ben peered at the activity around him. He watched people of both genders dance all around. They wore funny costumes, and their hair was dyed many different colors. Also, tame tigers with stripes on their fur did tricks. Outside, people could commission an informal portrait. They posed in front of a funny picture while an artist quickly drew them. Ben couldn't believe it. He was happier than he had ever been before. That day, Ben knew what he wanted to do. He loved the circus to such an extent that he wanted to have his own circus when he grew older. Seeing the circus was like a dose of medicine for him. He wasn't unhappy anymore. He felt special. He inquired about what he needed to do to have his own circus. He studied hard and learned about business. Ben worked very hard, and one day he had his own circus. It was a great circus. People told him that he could be very rich, but he wasn't tempted by money. He just wanted to make children happy. He knew the circus had changed his life, and he wanted to do the same thing for others.
Lazy Hans. Hans was lazy. He seldom helped his mother with anything. He didn't cook and he never mowed the lawn. He didn't even shave. He spent the daytime gambling with his mother's money. One day his mother realized that her money was gone from her purse. "You're banned from my house," she shouted. "Don't come back until you've learned your lesson." Hans went to live in the forest like an outlaw. But it was cold and Hans couldn't find food. He went to a cottage to ask for a meal. An aborigine answered the door. "Can I stay here, please?" Hans asked. "You can stay if you work," the man replied. Hans liked the prospect of food and warmth, so he agreed. The man pointed to a field. "Take this rod and plant it over there. I am a wizard, and this magic rod will bring us food." The field was far away. Hans knew it would be hard to walk there, so he just threw the rod behind the cottage and sat by the river. When daylight faded, he returned to the cottage and went to sleep. The next morning, the old man looked very fierce. "You didn't take the rod to the field," he shouted. "No," confessed Hans, "it was too far." "Because of you, we have nothing to eat," replied the man. Hans was terrified that the man would punish him, so he ran home. "Mama," he cried, "I'm desperate to come back." His mother was cautious. "Do you promise to work?" she asked. "Yes," said Hans. "I'll never be lazy again."
The Bremen Town Musicians. Larry the cow, Harry the rooster, and Lester the duck lived on a widow's farm. They dreamed of playing music in a parade. One day, the widow went to the lawn where her herd of cattle was grazing. "I'll eat him tomorrow," she said, pointing to Larry. Larry wanted to flee, but he didn't have the nerve to go by himself. Then his friends Lester and Harry showed him a poster. "It's for a parade in Bremen. We'll go with you, and we can perform our symphony there," Lester said. The animals put together a small bundle that held a drum, a flute, and a portable microphone. Then they took their baggage and initiated their long journey. They walked down a paved lane all day. That night, they looked in the window of a house. They saw a group of thieves. They were eating a large dinner and telling stories about their greed and the people they stole from. Lester was an optimist. He said, "I think we can scare them away." Soon, the animals came up with a plan. Harry flew inside and knocked over the lamp.
"What was that?"
screamed a thief as the bulb broke. They could barely see now. Then Larry stood on 2 feet, and Lester flew to the top of his head. They looked very big. All 3 of the animals made scary noises. The thieves tried to hit the animals, but Harry flew over them and scratched them.
"It's a phantom!"
yelled one thief. The thieves ran away. The animals ate and rested. The next morning, Larry said,
"Why go to Bremen? We can stay here and make music."
And so they remained there and were quite happy.
How did Greenland get its name? The nation of Greenland isn't very green. The sun's rays don't shine there for 3 whole months. As a result, it's covered with snow, ice, and frost. Then how was the name derived? It started with a Viking named Eric the Red. Eric had many merits. However, there was an underlying problem. He got angry easily. People were scared of him. However, he was married to the niece of a very powerful man, so everybody tried to be nice to him. One day, Eric fought with his neighbor and killed him. His consequent punishment was to leave Iceland. Many stories circulated about a land west of Iceland, but only a fraction of the people in Iceland believed them. Still, Eric wanted to find it. Eric sailed toward the land via the Atlantic Ocean. His marine knowledge was good, but the trip was hard. Some of his men drowned. Eric's lieutenant wanted to resign from his position. Others thought about committing suicide. Suddenly, Eric thought he saw something. "I don't believe it," said Eric. "It must be an illusion." But it was no trick. It was the new land. Eric trembled in the cold polar air. He saw that there was ice everywhere. He realized that the ice could keep enemies out. Not even the best navy could invade the new land. He could start a new dynasty in his name. But how could he convince people to live here? "I'll call it Greenland," he said. Eric's plan worked. Within 2 years, over 1,000 people moved to Greenland. In the end, Greenland got its name all because of a trick.
Everyone is special. When I was young, everything that went wrong in my house seemed to be my fault. Once, my brothers tried to make cookies. They blended flour and ginger and made a disgusting paste. Then they tried to wash it down the drain, but it got all over the floor. Later, my brothers said that I did it, and I had to wipe it up. I worried that my parents liked them more than me. One autumn day, I was sure I would make my parents proud. I bought a model rocket. After I put it together, I invited everybody to watch it. I wanted my brothers to envy my technical knowledge. I lit the fuse, but nothing happened. "Looks like your fireworks don't work. I hope you kept the receipt so you can return them," my brother said. "It's not fireworks," I screamed. They were making fun of me again. I didn't know what went wrong. I hadn't altered anything. I quickly moved the wires on the bottom, hoping that would help. Suddenly, the rocket flew up. We stood aside as it curved through the lawn and ran straight into the mailbox. Then the mailbox collapsed. The rocket was crushed. Embarrassed, I ran inside and hid. A few minutes later, my mom asked, "Are you okay?" "I just wanted them to be jealous of me for once. Now I see why you and Dad don't love me as much as them," I said. "That's not true," said my mom. "See my fingers? Each one is different. You kids are like my fingers. All are different, but I love them all the same." I embraced her. Now I know that my parents love me just as much as my brothers.
Pizarro and the Inca Gold. According to rumors, there's lots of precious gold hidden in the jungles of Peru. It got there when the Spanish conquered parts of South America. The Spanish noble, Francisco Pizarro, arrived in Peru in the 1500s. He found a group of people called the Incas. The Incas believed that their leader, Atahualpa, was both a king and a god. But Pizarro didn't agree. "It is a sin for a man to think he is God," he said to Atahualpa. Atahualpa thought Pizarro was insulting his heritage. He thought the blonde Spanish men held prejudices against the Incas. But Atahualpa was a kind man and didn't want to fight the Spaniards. He said, "If I give you a room full of gold, will you leave my country in peace?" Pizarro was suspicious. He thought Atahualpa was exaggerating. But a few days later, Pizarro returned to the Inca palace with his ambassadors. He saw a room filled with stacks of gold. There were golden necklaces, cups, plates, and vases. It was a great spectacle. He acknowledged that Atahualpa had told the truth. But after seeing the gold, he wanted all of Peru's gold, so he didn't leave the country. The Spanish soldiers stayed in Peru and grabbed all the gold they could find. But the Inca people tricked the Spaniards. They mixed the gold with tin so that it was poor quality. They gave this gold to the Spaniards. Meanwhile, they hid the good gold. They stuffed it into sacks and dragged it deep into the jungle. The Spanish conquerors never found the gold. People think it is still there today.
The boy who saved the town. Marcus lived in a small suburb near the sea. He was a stubborn boy, and he only cared about himself. His father worked as a chemist for an institution and wanted Marcus to get a job there. Instead, the boy delivered milk. Each morning he took dairy products to the grocers. One day, Marcus was jogging down the street with a gallon of milk to give to a merchant. He didn't want to be late. He ran down a path beside a large canal. A wall there kept water from coming into the town during high tide. But Marcus saw a small hole in the wall. Marcus knew that if the wall broke, it would be a tragedy for the town. At first, he hesitated. He had to choose between helping himself and helping the town. There was only one way to save the town. It seemed crazy to him, but it was the only thing he could do. He poked his finger into the hole. This didn't fix the problem forever, but it did postpone the tragedy. His finger ached. He felt the chill of the Arctic water as it splashed him. There was no one else around. He knew he had to wait until the tide descended. It was very difficult, but Marcus stayed there and saved the town. Once the tide had descended, Marcus told everyone what happened. A group of people went to the wall. They saw the hole and fixed it. Everyone was very happy with Marcus. The local Congress even gave him a gift for saving the town. He was a hero.
An interesting life. A man looked through some boxes with his grandson. They were filled with old photographs and objects that portrayed important events from the grandfather's life. He wished to share the circumstances behind each event with his grandson. The grandson, however, thought his grandfather's stories were boring. The grandfather coped with this. He ignored his grandson's criticism. He took a photo from the box. "That's the submarine I was on during the war," he explained. The grandson gazed at it. The grandfather glanced at the next picture and frowned. It showed a row of coffins. His grandson noticed the grief in his grandfather's face. "What is it?" the boy inquired. "This was after a nuclear bomb was dropped," the grandfather answered. "It devastated a city." Next, the grandfather pulled a toy microscope from the box and rotated it in his hand. "Where did you get that?" the grandson asked. "This is a souvenir I bought at the Science Museum," the grandfather said. Now the boy was really interested. He started to understand that his grandfather was telling him a larger story. It was the story of his grandfather's life. He got another photo. It showed a young bride and groom. They were very happy. A certificate was attached to the photo. The boy couldn't read it, but he traced his finger over paper. "What's this from, Granddad?" he asked. "That's my marriage license from the day I married your grandmother," the grandfather said. "Wow," said the boy. "Granddad, now I know all about your life."
The Kitten and the Caterpillar. Katie the kitten liked to play. One day, Corey the caterpillar emerged from a hole in the wall while Katie was playing in the living room. "Hey!" Katie yelled. "Do you want to play with me?" Corey was reluctant. He said, "I'd rather not play with you. I have several handicaps. My body is very delicate. Your claws are as sharp as hooks. You might cut me. Plus, I have no bones, not even a spine. You could easily hurt me." "I swear that I won't hurt you," Katie said. "No, I don't want to," he said again. He hopped from the wall, but Katie pursued him. Corey ran into the kitchen and into the cupboard, but Katie chased closely behind. Katie knocked appliances to the floor. Plates fell into the sink and broke in the basin. Then he ran into a bedroom. Some laundry was on the floor. Corey hid under a shirt, but Katie saw him. She jumped on the shirt. Her paws left stains on the cloth, and her claws ripped the sleeves into strips. However, Corey escaped. He utilized a small crack in the floor to hide, but Katie saw him. "Now you are trapped," said Katie. Corey tried to avoid Katie's claws. He moved his body as far into the hole as possible. He didn't know how he'd get out of the hole. Just then, Katie's owner came home. She saw that the house was a mess. She took a broom and swung it at Katie. She chased Katie out of the house. Corey was safe, and Katie was left outside because she didn't listen to the wishes of others.
The real Saint Nick. At Christmas, children wait for Saint Nicholas to bring gifts down the chimney. But it's not just a story. Saint Nicholas was a real person. A long time ago, a man named Marcus occupied a house with his family. He was not modest. He always told everybody he was the strongest man in the province. He worked hard, but he could barely sustain his family. He wanted to save money and prosper. Still, he could never earn a penny more than he needed. One day, Marcus made an agreement with a blacksmith. The blacksmith had a lot of work to do, but he couldn't do it all by himself. Marcus wanted to help him forge iron. The blacksmith agreed to compensate him with a lot of money. In the same town, there was a man named Nicholas. At an early age, Nicholas started preaching, but he also believed that he should be humble and charitable. He learned that helping people gave him even more satisfaction than preaching. One day, Nicholas encountered Marcus. Marcus told Nicholas about his agreement with the blacksmith. "I worked hard for him," Marcus said, "but a problem arose. Even though I worked for him, he didn't pay me." Nicholas wanted to help Marcus. That night, he went back to Marcus's house. He brought a bag of gold. It exceeded the amount that Marcus needed. Nicholas climbed up a ladder and dropped the bag of gold down the chimney. Marcus thanked his benefactor. Soon, people found out about Nicholas's gift. He became well known and loved. Even today, people still give secret gifts to children, and we say they are from St. Nicholas.
The Shepherd and the Wild Sheep. Once there was a shepherd. Every night he counted and gathered his sheep. He was sure never to overlook any of them. One night, he saw some wild sheep had joined his herd. He hoped to acquire the newcomers. It snowed that night. In the morning, the shepherd couldn't take his sheep out of his lodge. Instead, he had to feed them inside. He gave a small amount of wheat to his own sheep, but he gave more of the food to the wild sheep. He thought the extra wheat would discourage them from leaving. It snowed for several days. During that time, the shepherd's sheep ate very little. The wild sheep, however, ate very well. At last, the snow melted, and they ventured outdoors. As soon as he opened the door of his hut, the wild sheep started to run away. "Wait! This is how you repay me? After I treated you so kindly? Why do you run away?" the shepherd asked. His voice was full of hatred. The wild sheep stopped and turned toward the shepherd. "We're leaving because you fed us better than your own sheep," one of the wild sheep replied. "You tried to deceive us with your ridiculous plan. Yesterday you treated us kindly, but tomorrow you might be different. If more wild sheep joined your herd, you would treat us as inferior sheep." As the wild sheep ran away, the shepherd understood his offense. He knew this awkward situation was his own fault. He had not been a satisfactory caretaker. He was a fake friend to the wild sheep. Because of this, he had neglected his own herd.
The Boy and His Sled. Mike was the smallest child in school. Another boy, Joe, always teased Mike. Joe had a large scar on his face from fighting other children. One day, Joe offended Mike when he made fun of Mike's Valentine, Jane. Mike felt disgrace, but he didn't know how to make Joe stop. That day, Mike walked home down an alley. He found a bunch of wood boards next to a pine tree. He thought to himself, "I could build a decent sled from this. If I let Joe use it, he will be nicer to me and Jane." He took the wood home. Mike got an axe and cut the wood. He used nails to make sure that the pieces were not loose. As he worked, he bumped his elbow on the boards. The painful sensation made him want to cry. It was a hard chore, but he persisted. He worked overnight. By morning, the sled was finished. Mike called Joe on the telephone. He said, "Hi, Joe. Come over to my house right away." Joe didn't know why Mike wanted him to come over. When Joe arrived, Mike told him, "Joe, it irritated me the other day when you said mean things about my card to Jane. You weren't kidding when you said those mean things. But I'm not like you. I just built this sled, and I'll let you ride it with me if you are nice." They became friends, and Joe was grateful that Mike was so nice to him. He learned that it is more fun to be nice than to be mean.
Tiny Tina. In a distant land, there was a kingdom where fairies lived. Tina was a fairy. She had yellow curls and wore a dress made of wool. She always moved with grace. However, Because of her compact size, she was scared of mankind. One day, there was an eclipse of the sun. The fairies didn't know what was happening. They were scared, so they ran away. Tina looked for a place to hide. She found a garden with flowers blooming. Tina had a passion for flowers. She decided to hide there. She became sleepy and made a pillow with some leaves. She whistled happily as she worked, and she fell asleep. Suddenly, somebody sneezed. The sound woke Tina up. She saw a very big face looking at her. Tina was so scared that she couldn't move. She could feel her pulse going very fast. The big woman went into her house. When she came back, she gave Tina a cup. The woman sat on the ground among some decaying leaves. Tina dipped a finger in the cup and tasted it. It was tea with all kinds of delicious spices in it. Tina felt refreshed after drinking the tea. "I'm Wilma," the lady said. "I spend all my leisure time in my garden cutting flowers. Would you like some dessert?" Tina said yes. She was hungry, and she wasn't frightened anymore. She took a bite of cake and relaxed. "How did you get to my garden?" Tina told Wilma how she got lost. "That's terrible. Let us take you home." "Actually, I think that I want to stay with you," Tina said. She wasn't scared of big people anymore. Wilma and Tina lived happily ever after.
Trick or treat. Many different cultures have had traditions about the dead. People in places like Ireland, China, Egypt, and Mexico believed that souls needed food. They thought the food nourished them on their journey from cemeteries to heaven. People had to put out good things for souls to eat. However, if the food rotted or spoiled, the soul got mad. The wicked soul might curse the family and make them starve during the winter. In other places, people begged for food on a holiday that remembers the souls of dead saints. People wore disguises with hoods that covered their faces. If they did not get food, they played a trick on the home. For this reason, the activity is known as trick or treating. Shortly after people first began trick or treating, parents started sending their children to beg on that day. Housewives gave the children food if they performed a song or a dance. When people moved to America from all over the world, they brought this tradition with them. Inhabitants of villages started trick-or-treating in the early 1900s. In 1939, a children's publication acquainted the whole country with the tradition. It became very popular. Today, trick-or-treaters are not begging for food, and they are not scared of souls. They just enjoy the thrill of dressing up like creatures and getting candy. Ghosts and skeletons are favorite costumes. But some children wear fancy disguises, like pirates. They carry flashlights instead of fires. In some places, children still perform songs or riddles to get candy. But most of the time, they just say, "Trick or treat."
The Senator and the Worm. A rich senator lived in a big house. He had more money than anyone in his district. One day, he was sitting on a chair listening to a radio broadcast. As he listened to the news bulletin, a worm crawled from underneath the chair and onto his head. His cook was in the kitchen stirring some spaghetti sauce. Suddenly, a cry from the senator alerted him. He ran to the rear of the house where the senator was sitting. The cook looked and saw the worm. He tried to console the senator. "I'll take it off right away," he said. "No!" shouted the senator. "I want you to kill it." "But it's only a worm," the cook said. "Why should we execute it? It hasn't committed a crime." The senator could not endure the worm on his head. "Hurry!" he shouted. The cook looked through several drawers but found nothing. Then he ran to the closet and took out a pipe. He returned to the senator and lifted the pipe over his head. He knew he couldn't just tap the worm. He was going to hit it hard. He grasped the pipe tightly. "What are you waiting for?" said the senator. "Kill it!" The cook swung the pipe at the senator's head. "Oh no," the worm said. "He's going to chop me in half." It jumped off the senator's head. There was a tremendous noise. "Ow!" cried the senator. A bump rose upon his skull. Meanwhile, the worm crawled outside. "That was close," said the worm. "Instead of being nice, he wanted to hurt me. Now that man has a big bump on his head."
Patsy Ann. A long time ago in Alaska, a dog named Patsy Ann watched the horizon. Every day she waited by the bay for ships returning from an expedition. Patsy Ann was a brilliant dog, and she was very unique. She was deaf. She couldn't bark either. But she used all of her other senses to know when a ship was near. Patsy Ann lived on the streets. Her owners did not want her because she could not hear, so they abandoned her. She found refuge in a fancy hotel. Guests rubbed her back and scratched her chin. Many people gave her food. She became quite overweight. She became very famous. Visitors to Alaska were enthusiastic about meeting her. They brought presents for her. They liked seeing her, and the feeling was mutual. The mayor said Patsy Ann should be called the town's greeter. The people in town loved Patsy Ann too, even though she lived on the streets. They were willing to fight to keep her. A new law made all dogs wear a collar and get shots. The mayor received many complaints. People wanted Patsy Ann to be able to stay. One ambitious sailor got people to help. Together, they paid for Patsy Ann to go to the veterinarian. She got her shots and collar. She could stay. When Patsy Ann died, everyone missed the town's loyal greeter. So, the mayor hired someone to make a statue of Patsy Ann. He restored the town's greeter. Now, she sits at the dock forever, waiting for ships to come home.
The anniversary gift. Joe was a carpenter. He built houses in the Highlands. Joe's wife Stella used a needle and thread to sew elegant clothing. She only used beautiful fabric to make clothes. Since they didn't have a lot of money, they lived in an old shed. Water dripped in when it rained. They had broken chairs instead of a couch. But they had coal for heat and flour from the mill for bread. Together, they trimmed the bushes to make their house look nice. Joe and Stella were poor, but not ashamed. They were happy. Sometimes in the evening, they walked downtown. They looked in store windows and dreamed. Stella wanted a hairbrush with an ivory handle. She pulled her hair upwards every day because she didn't have a brush to make it nice. Joe wanted to fix his grandfather's watch. For their anniversary, Stella wanted to get Joe what he wanted. But then she did the arithmetic. It would take at least 6 months to save enough money. Then she had an idea. She cut off all of her hair and sold it. Meanwhile, Joe knew that he could never fix his watch, so he polished it and sold it. He made enough to buy the brush. On their anniversary, the door burst open. Joe was excited to give Stella his gift. But first, Stella gave him the money to fix the watch. When he saw his wife without any hair, he smiled. "I sold my watch to buy you something," Joe said. He gave her the brush, and she laughed. They were both willing to give up something very special to make each other happy.
Dalton versus the bully. Dalton was a nice boy, but sometimes the other boys made fun of him because he was so tall and skinny. Dalton's biggest problem was Mitch. He was a bully who boasted about his strength. He quarreled with the other boys. Sometimes, if boys gave Mitch their lunch money, he would have mercy and leave them alone. One day, the boys learned about a special middle school Olympics. Their gym class was going to be in it. Many kids were excited, but Dalton thought it sounded like torture. That morning, Dalton ate plenty of carbohydrates for breakfast. He entered the gym and looked at the dial on the clock. It was time to begin. The teacher asked if they were ready. Everyone nodded except Dalton. "I got stung by a bee. I need to see the nurse," said Dalton. He made it up so he wouldn't have to play. "I don't believe you. Get ready to play," responded the coach. First, they wrestled. Then they jumped, crawled, and played other games. But Mitch was dominant in every event. They strained all morning to defeat him. By lunch they were sore. Their entire bodies ailed them. They thought about how to win. They knew the last game of the day was volleyball. Kids who used to be Dalton's rivals became his allies. They wanted him to help them beat Mitch. Dalton was going to be Mitch's opponent. The game started. Every time Mitch tried to hit the ball over the net, Dalton stopped it. Finally, Mitch used all of his strength, but the ball bounced off Dalton's hands and back into Mitch's face. Finally, Mitch was defeated.
Anna the babysitter. Since her parents got a divorce, Anna has had to help her mother. In her mother's absence, Anna takes care of Grace, the baby. At first, Anna thought it was an easy job. One afternoon, Anna played with Grace. She meowed like a cat, and Grace imitated her. In fact, Grace reproduced every sound that Anna made. She took her sister outside. She put Grace in the wagon, but there was nowhere for them to go, so they went back inside. Anna put the infant on the floor and went into her room. But when she came back, Grace had vanished. Anna looked everywhere, but she could not find her sister. Maybe the baby had been kidnapped. "Where are you?" Anna called aloud. The situation was becoming urgent. She wanted to call her mom, but she didn't want her to think Anna couldn't do the job. Anna sat down. What was she going to do? But then, Anna heard something. It was coming from her room. "Grace?" She got down on her knees and looked under the bed. She could see Grace's bald head. Grace had followed Anna into her room and crept under the bed. "What a relief!" Anna cried. She picked up her sister and patted her on the head. Her head was soft and had no wrinkles. Grace was sucking on a thumb and looked tired. So Anna wrapped her in a blanket and sang rhymes for her. Then she put Grace in bed for a nap. After that afternoon, Anna knew that taking care of Grace was not an easy job. It takes a lot of work to take care of a baby.
Peter and the Dwarf. Peter was a hunter. One day he was in pursuit of a deer and became lost. He usually carried a compass with him when he went into the wilderness, but that day he left it at home. As he walked, the forest began to look different. He didn't see any bamboo. Instead, there were bushes with long leaves. The ecosystem was now very abnormal. Peter knew he was in the magic marsh. Now he was tired and thirsty. He was afraid. Being lost in the marsh could be fatal. When people entered it, they never came out. At last he found a pond. Flowers grew around it. The blossoms smelled like the best perfume. He felt relaxed, so he drank some water and fell asleep. When he awoke, he saw an evil dwarf staring at him. "What are you doing here?" it asked. The dwarf spoke in a strange dialect. "I'm lost," said Peter. "Can you help me?" "Yes," it said, but Peter didn't know it was dishonest. The dwarf took an old manuscript from his pocket. It was a magic map. "Just recite the words at the bottom," the dwarf explained. "It will show you how to get home." "Good," Peter said. He was impatient and quickly grabbed the map. He recited the magic words, and a line appeared on the map. He walked for many days but never left the marsh. Finally, the map led him back to the pond. He walked in a circle. The dwarf was still there. "Here's a proverb for you to think about," it said. "When patience is lost, then so are you."
The ice cream cone explosion. One day, John walked to his uncle's ice cream shop. When he reached the sidewalk, he caught the scent of ice cream cones and anticipated eating some ice cream. Sam opened the door. Uncle John had a new steel machine. "What is that?" "It's a cone maker. I built it from a kit. You take flour from the barrel and put it in this pan," Uncle John said. "Then add water and sugar here and stir it so the sugar dissolves. Next, you fasten down the beam." Uncle John wanted to look casual, but he was excited. He made a few swift motions and turned it on. There was a puff of smoke, and then cones came out the other end. "Is it hard to use?" Sam asked. "On the contrary, it's easy to use. Want to try?" Sam washed his hands with caution. He made a deliberate attempt to keep germs out of the dough. Soon, Sam had his first cone. He smiled in triumph. Uncle John tried to turn the machine off, but it just kept making cones. Sam and Uncle John put them on the counter, then on chairs. Before long, cones scattered all over the floor. They tried everything to stop it, but it wouldn't stop. "What are we going to do?" he said. "Kick it," yelled Sam. Uncle John lifted his foot and gave the machine a kick. It made a funny noise and exploded. They were both covered with dough. Uncle John laughed when he knew Sam was okay. He tossed Sam a rag to clean his face and smiled. "I guess we have enough cones now."
Sheriff Dan. Dan was the evil sheriff of Ocean Town. Dan was as cruel as the devil. He worshipped money. Dan was a millionaire, but he paid his police officers almost nothing. The police were very bitter, but Dan didn't care. He only cared about his money. Every person who inhabited Ocean Town disliked him. Dan enforced cruel laws. Once, Dan even put his own brother in jail for throwing a coin into a fountain. Sometimes he pointed his gun into the air and pulled the trigger. He didn't want the bullets to hit anyone. He just wanted to scare people with the loud sound. Finally, the people of Ocean Town decided that they had to get rid of Sheriff Dan. With their understanding, the crowd sought to unify the town. They marched to Dan's house. He was startled by the sight when he ran to the door. When he opened the door, the crowd jumped on him. They used a rope to tie him to a chair. Dan yelled, "Get your hands off of me! I'll put you all in jail for the rest of your lives." The crowd didn't listen. They carried Dan to the harbor and put him aboard a vessel. Dan was so scared that he began to sweat. He begged, "If you let me go, I will give you all my money." The crowd said back, "Sheriff, we don't care about your money. We know you will never change. We're sending you on a voyage to the middle of the ocean." The boat drifted out of the port, and Dan was never seen again. The people voted for a new sheriff who was kind and fair.
The Helpful Apprentice. There was once a small restaurant. People said that the best chef in the world worked there. But the chef was a horrible person to work for. He was impolite and scolded his workers all the time. The chef had a young apprentice. The apprentice's first priority was to make the best food in the world. He was happy to have a good teacher, but he didn't like the chef. The boy was a diligent worker, but the chef scolded him more than anyone else. Then one day, the chef got great news. The emperor wanted to have dinner there that night. He was very excited. He was working very fast, and he made a mistake. He cut his hand with a knife, and it started to bleed. The apprentice gave him a bandage, but the chef still couldn't cook. The chef started to panic. The apprentice tried to assure him, "Everything will be okay," he said, but the chef was still afraid. Then they started to work together. They began to bond. The chef told the apprentice what to do. The boy cooked a great meal. As soon as they finished, the emperor arrived. He wore a beautiful robe made of soft fibers. He also had a massive crown. Everyone in the restaurant kneeled when the emperor came in. The chef and the boy brought out his food. The emperor was used to luxuries. Would he like the food? The emperor loved the food. After his departure, the chef was very proud and very thankful to his new friend, the apprentice.
Why Monkey Has No Home. For 5 years there was a famine. The farmers asked people to bless them, and finally they had a good harvest. Since there was now plenty of food, the pharaoh decided to have a party. The party was a happy affair. For 5 days they had a huge feast. Monkey was very happy. Because of the famine, he was very slim. He wanted to eat a lot of food. When he arrived at the feast, hundreds of long tables were filled with food. There were nuts, bowls of cereal, and ripe fruit. He could also smell hot roasted meat cooking on the stove. The assembly of animals was merry. However, during the feast, Monkey thought of a scheme to exploit the pharaoh's kindness. He decided to steal some of the food and then eat it at home. All the animals were cheerful. They didn't notice that Monkey was hiding food. After the feast, Monkey took the food to his house and ate it. He repeated this routine every day for 4 days. But on the 5th day, the pharaoh had a surprise. He was going to give all the animals a home. Monkey was very excited, but when he arrived at the pharaoh's home, he could not get through the door. The diameter of his waist was wider than the doorway. He was too fat. Monkey asked the pharaoh to forgive him for his theft, but the pharaoh said no. "Pardon?" asked the monkey. He didn't understand why the pharaoh was being unkind. "Everybody else will have a home now, but not you. Now you know that greed gets you nothing. explained the Pharaoh.
Matthew learns a lesson. Matthew was a sensible boy. He always kept his room tidy and had a natural literary aptitude. One day, he hoped to have a career in journalism. The adolescent spent much of his time reading and liked having privacy, but his quiet personality hindered his ability to make friends. One day, Matthew went to the pharmacy to pick up some pills for his grandmother. He saw some boys leaning against a pole outside. One of the boys complimented Matthew. "I like your jacket." Another boy asked, "Do you want to go to Nate's restaurant?" "Sure," Matthew said. The boys walked to the restaurant. They were going to have slices of pizza. They ordered their food and drank soda with straws. They ate until their bellies swelled up. Matthew was having so much fun. One of the boys said, "Let's leave without paying." Matthew didn't want to, but he presumed his new friends wouldn't like him if he didn't. Suddenly, the waiter yelled, "Stop!" The two other boys ran, leaving Matthew there alone. Soon the police arrived. "Leaving without paying for your meal is the same as stealing," said the police officer. "The restaurant wants justice. So next week, you have to go to court and let a jury decide your punishment." When he went to court, the judge asked, "Do you have anything to say, Matthew?" He said, "I feel sorrow for what I've done. Now I know that real friends won't ask you to do something illegal." The jury then let him have his liberty, but they made Matthew pick up trash as punishment. Much to Matthew's surprise, he ended up meeting some new friends.
The Magic Cup. Paul and John were brothers. They fought all the time because they both wanted to be leaders of the agency they both worked at. There was a superstition in their town about a magic cup. People said the cup was in a volcano located far away. Anyone who retrieved the cup would have their wish come true. John and Paul both wanted to find it. Then they could become the leader. They both left to find the cup. Before their trip, their mother said they should work together. They dismissed that idea. Even though their trips originated from the same house, each wanted to travel alone. They were both miserable during the trip. They had to navigate small boats across shallow rivers and climb difficult slopes. Their journey spanned many days. When they finally got close to the volcano, the ground began to vibrate and the volcano erupted. Ash filled the sky and lava covered everything. John climbed to the top of a hill to keep from getting burned. A few moments later, his brother went up the same hill. They were confined to the hill until the lava cooled down. They talked about the things they had seen while wandering around the country. They felt more sympathy and affection for each other than ever before. They decided that fate had brought them together. The next day they left to finish the remainder of the trip together. Everything seemed much easier. When they finally found the cup, they learned that it didn't make wishes come true. It was only an ordinary cup. But the trip to reach the cup taught them to work together and love each other.
The Knight's Plan. A town was fighting for their independence from another country. Several rebels started a revolution. However, they were afraid of an invasion from a lot of troops. They didn't have enough warriors to stop them, so they asked a knight for help. The knight made a plan. A tall mountain was outside the town. The road near the top was very narrow. Cliffs rose on both sides of it. "We must trick the enemy. They have to follow us up the mountain," the knight explained. "On the narrow path, only a few can attack us at one time." The people agreed with the knight's plan. The knight put on his armor, and the warriors got their spears. When the enemy attacked, the knight and warriors acted as if they were afraid. They quickly withdrew toward the mountain. The enemy troops followed them up the steep path. Soon the enemy became tired. At the summit, the knight and his troops stopped. The enemy was close behind them, but now they were tired. Also, only a few could attack because the path was narrow. The knight and the warriors fought the enemy, but there were too many troops. The knight was afraid. If the warriors yielded the path to the enemy, the town would be lost. A storm suddenly came over the mountain. There was strong wind and rain. Thunder boomed. Lightning struck some trees near the enemy. The trees blazed. The flames scared the enemy, and they retreated. They ran down the mountain, out of the town, and never returned. The knight explained, "With a little luck, a good plan beats even a big army."
The Magic Pear Tree. It was a cool morning, and the grass was covered in mist. The market was full of people. A mean farmer named Jack yelled, "Pears for sale!" He sat on a bench, plotting how he could trick people. Then an orphan came to his cart. "Can you spare a pear?" she asked. Jack felt rage. He replied, "You don't have any money." "Please, I haven't had supper in days." "No!" shouted the farmer. The orphan sighed. However, a pregnant lady heard the dispute and confronted Jack. "Just give her a pear," she said. Jack had no shame and said no. Finally, a man bought a pear for the girl. The girl quickly ate it, but she saved the seed. She wanted to get revenge. She told Jack, "I know a way to get hundreds of pears in one day. I'll show you how." He watched the girl dig a hole. She dropped the seed into the ground. Then she spread the dirt over it. "Watch closely," she said. "In a few minutes, a stem will grow. It'll turn into a tree that's full of pears." Jack stared at the dirt, but nothing happened. The only objects there were a few daisies. He looked for the girl, but she had snuck away. Then he looked at his cart in horror. It was empty. He suddenly realized that the orphan had tricked him. While Jack was waiting for the tree to grow, the people had taken the pears from his cart. They all laughed while they were eating the tender fruit. The farmer felt ashamed. The incident taught him to be kinder. The history of chocolate. Many people believe that chocolate originally came from Europe. However, chocolate, called the food of the gods, was first made in the Americas. The first chocolate was very different from contemporary chocolate. Wild chocolate trees can grow easily in the humid Amazon rainforest. Clusters of flowers growing on these trees turn to seeds. About 20 to 60 cacao beans can be found in the seeds. Cacao beans are the ingredient needed to create sweet, soothing, and delicious chocolate treats. The Mayan and Aztec cultures both thought that chocolate trees were brought from paradise by gods. The Mayans and Aztecs used the beans from this divine tree to create a special beverage with a very pleasant odor. Surprisingly, the Aztecs believed that it would be toxic to women and children. In the 1500s, the Spanish explorer Cortés met the Aztecs. Cortés became quite interested in the plantations where the Aztecs cultivated chocolate trees. When he returned to Europe, he took cacao beans with him. He introduced the people of Spain to the Aztecs' chocolate beverage. Over the next 100 years or so, kings, queens, and members of the upper class enjoyed drinking chocolate. They enjoyed it even more once they learned to add sugar to the beverage. Soon, chocolate had spread all across Europe. New machines allowed chocolate makers to perfect their products and produce them at a very rapid rate. Preparing the beans in special ways brought out the aroma of chocolate. The beans were combined with condensed milk to give the chocolate a smooth texture. Today, contemporary chocolates with subtle flavors fill the shelves of expensive chocolate shops. The different types of chocolate available today vary widely. True chocolate lovers can tell which is best, though. They will tell you that the flavor of high-quality chocolate stays on the palate long after you finish it.
Monkey Island. In the middle of the ocean, there is a small island shaped like an arc. Here, monkeys play on the beach and in the trees. But how did the monkeys get there? Once an English admiral was exploring Africa when he found hundreds of monkeys. The admiral's character was mean. He thought, "I could sell these monkeys and become very rich. I'm going to take them to England." So the admiral set traps to catch the monkeys. He put stakes in the ground, tied string around them, and made loops in the string. When the monkeys ran through the forest, their feet got caught in the loops and they couldn't escape. Then the admiral put the monkeys in cages on his ship and sailed away. The cages were small and uncomfortable. There was no soft hay for the monkeys to sleep on. Instead, they slept on branches with sharp thorns that cut into the monkey's flesh. For dinner, he gave them tiny pieces of sour grapefruit to eat. The monkeys grew hungry and weak. But one day, the admiral hired a new steward. He was a kind man with a good conscience. He was horrified to see the thin monkeys in the cages, so one night he let them out. The monkeys ran and played all over the ship. They attacked the admiral and the steward and ate their food. They completely wrecked the ship. One monkey ran into a kerosene lamp and it fell over. The ship caught fire and began to sink. The whole crew was lost except for the monkeys. After the accident, the monkeys jumped onto a raft. They floated away from the fiery blaze of the ship. In the morning, they saw a little island in the distance. The monkeys used a piece of wood as a paddle, and they went toward it. They found the island shaped like an ark. They felt so happy to find a new home, and they still live there today.
The Young Man and the Old Man. A proud young man was looking for a new pastime. He heard about people hiking in the national parks and decided to try it for himself. As he started his stroll, an old man walked up to him. "Don't go this way," the old man said. "Beware. The paths are not clear. It's easy to become lost." But the young man disagreed with the old man and bragged that he had a perfect understanding of the park. "I studied maps of this area," he told him. "I believe I have a thorough knowledge of these trails. I won't become lost." The old man listened to the young man and then admonished him for his pride. "I have walked these trails my entire life," he said. "If you think you will be safe, then go ahead." The young man ignored the old man and started along the trail. Whenever he had to choose between an easy or difficult route, he always chose the more difficult option. In addition, he was not conscious of which direction he was going. After a while, he decided to return home. Because his course through the wilderness was so indirect, he had no idea where he was. He looked at his map, but could not pinpoint his location. He walked one path after another, but soon realized he was lost. The sun was going down, and sudden strong winds gave a hint that it might rain. Immense clouds filled the sky. Awesome sounds of thunder were audible from all directions. It echoed off the mountains. The thought of the eventual storm tormented the young man. He hurried in one direction, but soon switched out of confusion. Luckily, it led him out of the park. When he arrived home, he knew that he had acted like an idiot. He realized he was lucky to be alive. He decided to listen to people with more experience than himself.
The Tricky Fox. There was a fox that lived in the forest. Fox loved to play mean tricks on the other animals. One day, he used the sharp rim of a bottle to dig a pit in the ground. He hid in a tree until Rabbit came to the pit's edge. Then, he jumped out and pushed Rabbit into the pit. Fox laughed and ran away. The angry Rabbit climbed out and told the other animals what happened. The others said, "That is typical behavior for Fox. He does mean things all the time. Sometimes, he is completely immoral. We all disapprove of his actions, so we should teach him a lesson. Tomorrow, we'll push Fox into that pit." The next day, all of the animals hid near the pit and waited for Fox. Fox was oblivious to the hidden animals. He walked up to the pit to see if Rabbit was still trapped. Just then, the other animals ran up to Fox and pushed him in. All the animals laughed and cheered, except Fox, of course. Fox couldn't get out. The walls of the pit were covered in damp ivy. It was too slippery for him to climb out. He was utterly helpless. He moaned and began to weep. At last he saw Eagle watching him from her roost. He yelled, "Eagle, please help me. If I don't get out of here, I will perish." Eagle said, "You may think your tricks are trivial, but you hurt others when you do mean things. I'll help you if you promise to be nice." Fox said, "I promise." Eagle began her flight to the bottom of the pit. She picked up Fox with her beak and soared out of the pit. She dropped Fox safely on the ground. Fox thanked Eagle and kept his promise. He was nice to the other animals. The animals even became fond of Fox, and the forest was a happy place.
The Magic Computer. I had a difficult geography project to finish by the end of the semester. My teacher wanted it to be typewritten, so I went to the school computer room. But when I got there, all the computers were turned off. Apparently, there was a recent problem and technicians were fixing it. I knew of some private study rooms downstairs. They were small and dark, and the computers were very old, but I had no choice. At least the computers were operating correctly. I typed and highlighted the assignment's title, Evaluate the Government's Response to Global Warming. But I didn't know what to write in my essay. Finally, I decided to find a book to help me. I went to the library, checked the book indexes, and eventually found a useful book. Then I returned to the computer. When I looked at the screen, I saw something so weird that I nearly fainted. The essay was complete. Had somebody in cyberspace written it? I didn't know, but I was very happy. I printed it out and handed it in. I got an A. After that, I used the computer for all my assignments. I'd type the title, wait a while, and the computer would do it. Every assignment was perfect. I never had to edit anything. I stopped paying attention to my teacher's lectures and spent my extra time in the gymnasium, and my grades got better and better. A month later, I was walking into class when my friend said, "Are you prepared for the test?" "What test?" I asked. "The geography test," he replied. "I hope you studied. It's worth 70% of our final grade." I failed the test, of course. I was completely ignorant about the subject. After that, I made a resolution never to use the magic computer again. The moral of this story is that if you cheat at school, you won't learn anything.
Jack Frost and the Pudding. Every winter, a magical boy with a wild spirit named Jack Frost arrives in town. He wears a white cape, and his role is to cover everything with frost and ice. But Jack Frost also gets pleasure from playing tricks on common folks. One dark winter evening, he was sitting on the rail of a fence near a river, pointing at some trees. When he did so, there was a pop, and the trees were evenly covered in frost. Then old Tom Muggins came along the path. He was carrying a basket of ingredients for his wife's cake recipe. "I'll have some fun with him," said Jack Frost. He pointed, and suddenly there was a patch of ice on the path. Poor Tom slipped and fell into the river. The bags of flour, fruit, and sugar fell open and got wet. A couple of eggs broke, and a stick of butter shrank in the water. Tom gathered the ingredients and climbed out of the river. The food made an absolute mess of the path.
"Alas,"
he cried,
"there'll be no cake for me."
Jack Frost laughed at poor Tom because his nice suit got soaked as well. "Are you cold?" he said. "Don't worry, I'll make you warm." He pointed at the mess in Tom's basket. Suddenly, there was a spark. What was left of the food caught fire. Jack Frost ran off laughing. Poor Tom sat by the fire. He could only envision how angry his wife would be. He wished he had been more attentive and noticed that Jack was around. Suddenly, a pleasant smell came from the basket. Tom looked inside. The butter was melting, and the eggs were starting to cook. Even the fruit began to simmer. Soon there was a fat, brown pudding in the basket. Tom tasted it. It was delicious. He happily took it home for dessert. Although Jack Frost had tried to make Tom's life difficult, Jack had actually made Tom a wonderful pudding.
The Architect's Plan. An architect wanted to build a new office building. He selected some land that seemed perfect. He planned to cut down the trees to make room for the building. But there was a problem. A big problem. The land was actually the habitat of several types of birds. Some nature lovers were very upset with the architect. First, they held a rally and told others about the issue. Then they decided to take legal action because the architect didn't respect the animals' rights. To resolve the problem, they asked a judge to intervene. The judge could not call any witnesses for the nature lovers, so he first asked the architect to tell his side of the story. "Why are you going to destroy the bird's habitat?" the judge asked. The architect replied, "I have the deed to the land. I want to make a great building there. As you may know, all my buildings become memorable landmarks." Then one of the nature lovers spoke.
We believe that there is no reason to destroy all the trees. We just want to protect the birds.
Then the judge made his decision. "I proclaim that the office building should be built," he said. "It is not a crime to remove those trees. I cannot give you a sentence for any offenses, but I feel obliged to make one request. I will only allow you to use half of the land. The other half will remain free so the birds have a place to live." The nature lovers could not conceal their gratitude. All of the people cheered. The architect said, "I have an idea. I will volunteer my time and efforts to design a new type of building. It will provide bushes on the roof where birds can live. There are enough resources in my company's bank account to create the best building ever made." The architect did exactly as he promised. He built this new type of building, which was loved by everyone.
Janie and the music player. Janie had constant thoughts about getting a music player. One day, she was late to class. She hurried down the hall, but halted when she saw a backpack on the floor. She looked inside and found nothing but some books. She reached inside the bag and felt a small object at the bottom. It was a music player enclosed in a black case. Janie tended to be honest, and she had no valid reason to take the device. However, her desire for the player influenced her decision. Janie was being sly. She put the device into her own backpack. When she arrived at class, she gave her teacher the bag. "I found this," she said. Ms. Johnson asked, "Does this backpack belong to anyone?" A girl named Linda claimed the bag. Linda looked inside and yelled, "My music player is missing. Janie took it." Janie answered, "I did not." Linda responded, "You were the only one that had access to it. If your version of the story is true, you let Miss Johnson check your bag." Janie started to perspire as she realized the impending trouble she was in. She gripped her bag tightly. Ms. Johnson took the bag from Janie. Inside, she found the player. "Janie, I never expected this kind of conduct from you," she said. "You've always been such a good student." Ms. Johnson gave Linda the player. Linda said, "Miss Johnson, look!" There was a crack along one side. She turned it to the on mode, but it wouldn't work. It must have snapped while Janie was holding on to the bag so tightly. Ms. Johnson called Janie's parents. They were very upset.
"Stealing is illegal. You have no respect for the law whatsoever," they said. "We bought you a music player, but we're giving it to Linda. It will replace the one you broke."
In the end, Janie's bad behavior left her with nothing at all.
Growing to be great. When George was just a boy, he didn't have any parents. The rumor was that they died in a car accident. Many bad things could have happened to George, but he was lucky. He was sent to live alongside other children without parents. There were kind people to assist George and help him go forward with his life. However, he was a pessimistic and mean little boy. George was often outraged. He told mean rumors about the other kids. He smashed furniture and even slapped other boys. He defied anyone who tried to help him, and soon it was difficult for them to forgive him. But George did display a love for one thing. He loved to play baseball. Whereas he was lazy in school and liked neither the subjects nor the teachers, he was lively and happy when he played baseball. One of George's teachers noticed his talent. He began to work with the boy. At first, they only talked about baseball. The teacher watched George play. He was a very efficient hitter. He almost never missed the ball. The teacher thought that George looked majestic when he played. When George hit the ball, it flew through the breeze as if it would never come down. In time, they began to talk about other things. They talked about George's family and his dreams for the future. They developed a very good relationship. As George got older, he began to grow. His appetite was huge. He ate and ate. He got stronger. Soon the other boys and even the teachers looked small and feeble next to him. Everyone thought that this heralded the start of a great baseball career. When George got his first job as a baseball player, he gave most of his wages to the people who had helped him as a boy. He hoped that other children would also find a way to live happy, successful lives.
Anton's Great Discovery. Anton van Leeuwenhoek was a Dutch cloth merchant. His life began to change after he got his first microscope in 1653. It was a very simple microscope. It had a lens and an upright stand. It could make small things look large. It was handy for looking closely at cloth. Soon, Anton felt a longing to build a more powerful microscope. He dreamed of using it to make an important scientific discovery. He wanted to become famous. 3 decades later, he did. For many years, Anton experimented with microscopes and lenses. Eventually, he constructed a very powerful microscope. If he had sold the concept to others, it would have made him very rich. However, Anton refrained from surrendering his secret to anyone. Instead, he wanted to use it to become famous. So he used his secret microscope to study the natural world. One day he was looking at saliva from his mouth with the microscope. In the saliva, he saw numerous tiny particles. Some of them were moving. He thought that the particles were tiny organisms. So he isolated them from each other and studied each one carefully. Then he classified them into different categories. Some were round, others were long and had tails. All were alive. Anton was so excited. He knew he could become famous now. He was the first person to see these tiny organisms. So he drew diagrams of the organisms and sent them to a group of scientists in London. The scientists were sophisticated men who did not believe tiny animate organisms could live in our mouths. Anton made a plea for them to come to Holland to see the organisms with their own eyes. The men took a ferry to Holland and met Anton. They performed a careful review of his work, and they conceded that he had made a worthwhile discovery. Anton van Leeuwenhoek had discovered bacteria. After decades of hard work, he had become famous.
How a singer helped win the war. Sometimes famous people are vain. They only care about themselves. But Josephine Baker was an exception. In the 1930s and 1940s, Baker was one of the most famous women in France. She was a big part of the new jazz genre and culture and had a diverse group of fans. The French people especially loved her, and she loved France. So when World War II started, she wanted to help the nation that had given her so much. In 1940, armed German troops entered Paris. When this happened, some French people formed a secret alliance. It was called the French Resistance. The group worked for the defense of France. It helped the European and American armies fight the Germans. Baker was an important member of the resistance. She had 3 jobs. The first was to carry messages to and from other members. The messages were written in code on her sheets of music. The second was to provide shelter and supply goods to resistance members. It would have been dangerous if the Germans found them. Baker's third job was the most important. Baker held concerts for European politicians and army members. She lured them in, promising an entertaining show. She enchanted them with her singing and dancing and got lots of applause. But Baker was always equipped with a small notebook at these concerts. She listened for details about the war and wrote them down. Baker sorted the details and gave authoritative reports to the resistance. Some thought Baker's fame would be an obstacle. The Germans knew who she was, but they didn't think she was smart enough to work for the resistance, so she could get information from the Germans easily. This helped the resistance and the French army save lives and win the war. Baker had a big impact on the resistance's work. She got many awards for her help. When she died, the army had a special ceremony to thank her again for her bravery.
The Sun and the North Wind. The sun and the north wind were talking to each other in the sky. The north wind was saying that he was better than everyone else. The sun listened as the north wind talked with enthusiasm about how powerful he was and how he could push something from one continent to another with one breath. He said,
I am the strongest thing in the sky.
Really? Asked the sun. How do you know that you are more powerful than the stars or the rain or even me?
The north wind laughed with disrespect. He yelled,
You? That's a joke.
This hurt the sun. He was usually timid and did not want to cause conflict. Today, he decided that he should teach the north wind a lesson. In the meantime, a man began walking along the avenue down on earth. When the sun looked down on the terrain below, he saw the man. He pointed down to the earth and said,
Do you see that man walking below? I bet I can get his jacket off of him. Can you?
Of course.
The north wind replied as he took a deep breath and filled his lungs with air. He used all of his muscles in his face and belly to blow winds at his target in succession. The harsh air currents made the man cold. The man pulled his jacket more tightly around him. It did not come off. The sun decided to rescue the man from the mischief of the north wind. He said,
May I try?
Then he sent down sunlight that made the man warm. The man leaned against a tree. He took off his jacket and enjoyed the nice weather.
You are very powerful, the sun said to the north wind, but you use violence in your bid to appear strong. You should think of an alternative. The strongest people don't use force to get what they want.
The Big Race. Alex woke up scared because of a nightmare. In it, he was running a race. Just before he reached the finish line, he fell. Alex thought that it was a subconscious way that his brain was trying to warn him about something. He was going to run in a race that day. Did the dream mean he was going to lose? He became irritable.
Good morning,
said Alex's mother.
I brewed some coffee and made you a special breakfast.
Alex didn't want it. It had too much sugar. He needed something nutritious, so he prepared a meal that contained a lot of protein to maximize his energy for the race. Then his father asked, Do you want help packing your stuff? No, replied Alex. He wanted to make sure that he had all of his equipment for the race. Alex's family got in their van and drove to the track. When they arrived, a boy ran toward Alex.
Can I have your autograph?
Asked the boy. Alex had many fans. He usually charmed everybody he spoke to. However, today Alex refused to give the boy his signature. He needed to think about his race. He took his jump rope from his bag and started his usual workout. Maybe exercising would help him forget about the nightmare. The race is about to start, said the coach. Beads of sweat formed out of Alex's sweat glands. All he could think about was his terrible dream. He thought it might be his destiny to become a loser. While he was thinking, he didn't hear the horn that meant the race had started. The runners zoomed toward the finish line. By the time Alex started, he lagged far behind everyone. He couldn't run fast enough to catch up to the others. He had lost the race. He shouldn't have let the nightmare affect him. He should have stayed focused on the race.
The brothers and the bread. Two brothers wanted to go outside and play. However, because the only bread in the house was stale, their mother told them they needed to bake fresh bread. I have to have the car repaired, she said. When I return, if the bread is ready, you can play. The brothers hurried to prepare the bread, but not carefully. They didn't sift the flour. They were careless and sprinkled too much salt into the mixture. The dough needed to be soft and flexible, but the salt made it into a lump that was as hard as a brick. The younger brother uttered a sigh.
Now we have to start again,
he said.
No, we don't,
the older brother replied.
I'll fix it. I just need to make the dough flat again and add water to it.
He decided to hit the ball of dough with his fist to make it flat. But he hit it so hard that it flew right off of the table and knocked over a glass, which shattered. The dough then crashed into the kitchen window shutters and crumbled. Luckily, the brothers were not injured, but they did make a huge mess. A slight mistake now became a major problem. The brothers had ruined the kitchen. Just then their mother returned. She saw the mess and became flushed with anger.
Now you can't play, she said. Instead, you have to clean the kitchen. I want this kitchen to be so clean that it may sparkle.
The brothers cleaned the floor and expressed their sorrow to their mother. Soon they were reconciled, but there was no bread, and it was too late to play. They realized that trying to do something quickly often makes more work.
Laika, the space dog. One of the world's most beloved space travelers was also the furriest. Laika was a little dog living on the streets of Moscow, Russia. She matured on the streets because no one would give her a home. She had to learn how to live without eating much. She found ways to keep warm in a very cold climate. Scientists thought a tough dog like Laika would do well in a project they were putting together. In a prior launch, Russia had put the first man-made object into space. Now, scientists wanted to see if a living thing could go to space. Although many facts about space had been learned, they weren't enough to help send humans to space safely. Laika and 2 other dogs were chosen to help scientists with their research. The animals were used in a variety of tests. In the end, though, only Laika would go to space. On November 3, 1957, the Sputnik 2 spaceship was due to leave Earth. Scientists carefully applied wires to Laika's skin to measure her body's reactions once she got into space. Laika also wore a special leash. Without it, she would float around in the spaceship. Soon after, Laika left the planet. Scientists on Earth awaited information from the ship. But in the midst of so much excitement, something very sad happened. Scientists were able to tell that Laika was under a lot of stress. The trip confused and scared her. Laika's entire ship had become as hot as a furnace. Scientists were powerless to help the dog in her misery. After about 5 hours, Laika died. Some have complained that the little dog should never have been used in the mission. Scientists knew that she would not survive the trip. Laika was never buried, but a memorial has been established in Moscow. There are many songs and books about her too. It seems that Laika became a hero to many people.
Gwen's new friends. Gwen walked into the gym for her next class. Coach Peeves said, "Today we're playing basketball. The custom is to let you choose your own teams. However, we're going to do things differently." The coach assigned each girl to a team. There were 6 girls per team. Gwen glimpsed at her teammates. She didn't know any of them. All of her friends were on the other teams. She couldn't believe her misfortune. "I feel sick. May I go to the nurse?" asked Gwen. The coach could foresee Gwen's excuses. It wasn't the first time Gwen tried to leave class. With a stern voice, the coach said no. Gwen was vehement. "I don't know any of these girls. Let me play on another team, please," she pleaded. "Gwen, don't be disobedient. I don't want to hear any more negative comments from you." Gwen had no choice. Then a girl smiled at her. "Hi, I'm Stephanie. I was in your English class last year," she said. Gwen remembered her. "For the sake of the team, please try your best. I know you're a good player," said Stephanie. When the game started, Gwen played as best as she could. She took a long shot. The ball sailed through the air and went right through the hoop. "That was awesome," said one of her teammates. Later, Gwen fell with a loud thump. "Are you okay?" asked her teammates. They were worried. She had ripped her jeans. She had scraped her knee and had a small bruise. Gwen told her teammates, "My knee is fine, and I can stitch my pants later. Let's keep playing." By the end of the game, Gwen forgot altogether that she hadn't wanted to play, and her team won. The victory bound Gwen's team together. She had made a lot of new friends, and they were a source of happiness for her for many years.
Kara goes camping. "Kara, would you like to go camping with my family?" asked Tracy. Kara had never been camping before, but she decided to go anyway. That weekend, they drove to Estes Park. When they arrived, Kara looked around. She felt so far from civilization. After they set up the camp, they went for a walk. Tracy's father, Mr. Greaves, showed them the native plants and animals. "Look," he said, That's a fox's den. Do you see that bunch of mushrooms next to it? Don't touch them. They contain poison. Kara was bored. She didn't care about nature. As the day went on, mighty clouds soon loomed in the distance. It looks like stormy weather, said Tracy. We should go back. It suddenly began to rain. They used an umbrella to shield them from the rain. Back at the camp, they ate cold sandwiches for dinner and went to sleep. By morning, the rain had stopped. It was a drastic change from the previous day's weather. They folded their sleeping bags and put them in a box. Tracy closed the lid and told Kara, "Today will be fun, I promise." Kara didn't believe her. She missed her convenient life in the city. She was used to an urban lifestyle. After breakfast, they went for a walk. The grass was covered with dew, and it gleamed in the sunlight. Finally, they reached a lake. Kara and Tracy waded into the water. The reeds swayed in the wind, and a flock of birds flew above. Kara felt very peaceful. That night they made a fire. They sat around it while Mr. Greaves told scary stories. Kara had a lot of fun. Camping was a good way for friends to spend time together, she realized. The next day it was time for them to leave. She felt sad while they exited the park. She didn't like camping at first, but she learned how fun it could be over the weekend.
The school play. Peter was excited. Next week he was going to audition for the school play. Everybody knew he was a great actor. He was sure he would get the lead role. Later, his friend Robbie asked him, "Have you seen the script for the play?" "Yes, the title is The Lost Glove. It's a comic play," replied Peter. Robbie said, "I want to play the part of the hermit because the hermit gets to talk with an accent." "I want the lead role of the barber. I didn't know you liked acting. I thought you liked choir better," said Peter. "Acting is also a hobby of mine. Do you want to practice with me?" "The basement at my house is quiet. It's perfect," Robbie replied. "I don't like practicing with others. It complicates the process for me," said Peter. Actually, Peter didn't want to practice at all. The teacher would surely reserve the lead part for him. A few days later, Robbie came to his house. Robbie said, "Do you want to practice the scene on the staircase? It's the part where the migrant searches for a new job." Peter declined the invitation. "I can't today. I need to do some errands." Then he slammed the door. It was just an excuse. Peter didn't want to help Robbie. On the day of auditions, Peter wore his lucky leather jacket. He always got the best part when he wore it. The teacher told him to begin, but his mind was blank. He couldn't remember the lines. A week later, the teacher put a list of the parts on the wall. Peter read the list, looking for his name. He was shocked by what he saw. He blinked his eyes and looked again. He didn't get the lead part. Robbie did. Peter pondered the situation and came to the idea that Robbie justly received the part. He earned it by practicing. Next time, Peter would practice too.
Isaac's first plane trip. Isaac's family was going on vacation. He was excited about the trip, except for one thing. He had never been on a plane before. He was scared that his plane would have a breakdown. Isaac got onto the plane. He walked down the aisle until he found his seat. He sat down and connected the ends of his seatbelt. After being idle for a few minutes, the pilot announced that they were ready to leave. He looked out the window at the vivid colors of the sky. He began to feel scared. The girl sitting next to him said, "Hi, I'm Rachel. You look nervous, but you don't need to be. Flying is fun." "I'm still a bit nervous," Isaac said, "and I'm getting hungry." "The food service will begin soon. Just lower the tray on the seat in front of you and flip this switch. Then they'll bring your dinner. Last time, they served chicken, peas, and a box of raisins," Rachel explained. Then the pilot notified the passengers of bad conditions in the atmosphere. "We're tracking the weather. Lightning, clouds, etc. The ride might get a bit rough," he stated. Suddenly, the plane started to shake. Isaac was badly afflicted by his fear. His stomach hurt and he thought he might vomit. He couldn't believe that he was in such an unfortunate place. Finally, the shaking stopped. Isaac was still scared, but he tried to retain a good attitude. The first time I flew, the plane shook so bad that cargo started falling. My parents told me to listen to music and read a chapter in my book. It calmed me, Rachel said. Suddenly, the plane shook again. This time, Isaac followed Rachel's advice. He put on headphones and took out a book by his favorite author. The book and the music helped Isaac feel better. After a while, he didn't even notice the bad weather. The bad situation didn't feel so bad after someone helped him.
The betrayal. A king lived in a fort with his daughter Clara. The king had founded a great empire, but his land was rife with enemies who wanted to take over the kingdom. Because there was so much civil unrest, the king told Clara not to trust anyone. One day, Clara was walking outside when she saw a girl sweeping the path. Clara crossed the garden, and they started talking. The girl's name was Susie. Clara felt sorry for Susie because she was very poor, and Clara gave her a bracelet. After that, Susie and Clara met every day. Once the king saw them talking. He told Clara, "Don't talk to that girl. She could be an enemy." "You can't distrust everyone," commented Clara. "She is my sole friend. It's okay to be friendly to people." The king said, "Don't argue with me. Stay inside from now on and talk to no one." Clara felt lonely in the fort, but one day she saw Susie outside. She wrote her a note with a map showing a secret entrance to the fort. Clara wrote, "Come at night and we can talk together. Don't show anybody this note." She threw the note to Susie, and Susie tucked it in the lining of her dress. That night Clara waited for Susie. But she heard something ticking, and then a loud blast. She ran into the hall, and it was full of smoke, which made her choke. A mass of soldiers were there fighting. Clara realized that Susie had betrayed her and given the map to her father's enemies. Clara prayed that everyone in the castle would be safe from her friend's treachery. At last, the fighting ceased. Clara found her father in the hall with his soldiers. They had defeated their enemies, but there were dents in their armor from the heavy fighting. Clara told her father what she had done and promised never to disobey him again.
The Teller and the Thieves. A teller at a bank suspected some of her fellow employees of not being very trustworthy. She thought they were stealing. In order to catch them, though, she needed some way to link them to the crime. She had a background in religion and folklore. She remembered that one religion's literature had a myth that chronicled how a group of thieves was captured. In the millennium-old story, coins of copper were covered with venom taken from a poisonous snake. The coins were left as bait for the robbers. When they touched the coins, the venom infected their bodies through their skin. The venom ran through their veins, and they all became very sick, as if they had a disease. It made their skin purple. The police arrested whoever had purple skin. She knew she couldn't use venom because it might hurt someone. However, she thought of a way to update the old story. She decided to cover a sum of money with a special powder. If people touched the money, the powder would cause their skin to itch. She placed the stack of money in the bank safe. No one was supposed to take money from the safe. If somebody did, then they had to be stealing. Within a few hours, 3 of her co-workers were scratching their hands and arms. They itched so badly that they couldn't even work. She checked the money, and it was gone. She told her boss what she had done, and he had the thieves arrested. He thanked her and promoted her. Because events from history often repeat, ancient literature had helped the teller solve a crime. She proved that stories from the past still relate with the problems of today, and they can be helpful in solving problems.
The Scribe's Warning. A great and powerful empire needed the wood from its western areas to build palaces and homes for the emperor and his friends. However, the empire had depleted many of the forests. The trees were important to the western area's economy. With no trees to sell, the commerce in that area was reduced. Citizens could no longer purchase the goods that they needed to survive. Their life became difficult. A poor scribe from the area wanted to help. He hitchhiked to the capital to ask the emperor for charity. He was invited to the palace. It was large and cozy. Tables were loaded with food, and fires burned warmly in every fireplace. The emperor sat up upon his throne, and the scribe stood in front of him. "I've come to ask for help," the scribe said. "We're all very poor and hungry. You've used up all of the forests, and now we have nothing to sell." Then he added a warning. "If we don't receive help, I'm afraid that the entire empire will suffer. We must establish some unity." Upon hearing the scribe's request, the emperor's bad temper surfaced. He mocked the scribe. "You think I should help," he said and laughed. "You should just be happy to belong to this great empire. You will get nothing from me." The emperor felt no pity for the citizens of the western area. They were condemned to starve. The scribe returned home with nothing. Not long after, an enemy invaded the empire from the west. They were marching to the capital. Because the citizens felt persecuted by the emperor, they remained neutral. They didn't fight the invaders, but allowed them to march freely to the capital. The emperor was defeated. If he had heeded the words of the scribe, then the citizens might have been the victors. But because he had treated them badly, they treated him badly in return.
How the dinosaurs really died. Many scientists and intellectuals think that dinosaurs died when an asteroid smashed into the Earth millions of years ago. However, recently, there has been some controversy over this theory. Some scientists think that it isn't accurate. They think that a tiny insect may have been the biggest factor in the death of these huge creatures. That insect was the mosquito. These scientists do think that an asteroid hit the Earth in the time of the dinosaurs, but that wasn't what killed all of them. At that time, insects, including the mosquito, were beginning to evolve. Today, we can regulate the number of mosquitoes with pesticides. But that was impossible millions of years ago. The mosquitoes multiplied quickly, and they were certainly not idle. Since there were so many mosquitoes, it was easy for them to bite many of the dinosaurs. When they bit another living thing, the mosquitoes passed along a deadly disease. So, the dinosaurs were stricken with the disease. A vast majority of them, from the vegetarians to the meat-eaters, died. To reinforce this idea, scientists stress how gradually the dinosaurs died. If an asteroid killed them, they would have died very quickly. But the number of dinosaurs decreased slowly. In addition, scientists have found genetic material of mosquitoes in fossils. This material proves that mosquitoes existed back then. Although there may have been other factors, the dinosaurs died mainly because of disease, the scientists say. No matter how it happened, the dinosaurs' death had a major impact on other living things. Many dinosaurs ate mammals. After the dinosaurs died, mammals were able to evolve and produce offspring. Birds also evolved. Scientists have analyzed the genomes of birds, and they discovered that birds have identical genetic material to some dinosaurs. So there may still be dinosaurs among us after all.
The Traveler and the Innkeeper. A traveler stopped at an inn. He sat and watched people closely, like a predator. He heard the old innkeeper talking to a young man in the core of the inn. "I just need to borrow some money. I swear that I'll spend it in moderation, and my friend will pay you back tomorrow," the man said. The innkeeper gave his consent and pulled out some money. The traveler knew that this was a trick. The man was going to leave with the poor innkeeper's money and never return. He felt compassion for the nice innkeeper and did not want him to be tricked. The cunning traveler decided to teach the innkeeper a lesson. The traveler walked over to the innkeeper and sat down. The innkeeper had started to grind coffee beans to make coffee. He made the coffee and handed the traveler a saucer and a cup. The two started talking. After a while, the traveler yawned and then growled like a wolf. "Are you not sane? I thought I just heard you growl," said the innkeeper. "I did. I am cursed. Every time I yawn 3 times in a row, I turn into a wolf and attack people." The innkeeper became tense. Then the traveler yawned again. As the traveler started to yawn a 3rd time, the innkeeper turned to run outside. As he ran, the traveler snatched his coat. The scared innkeeper staggered outside and tumbled into the street. The traveler followed him out because he did not want to withhold the truth any longer. He just wanted to foster happiness and restore the innkeeper's emotional equilibrium. The innkeeper was dizzy and he stumbled. The traveler helped him stand up. "That was a trick," the traveler said as he returned the coat. "Oh, good. I cherish this coat," responded the innkeeper. "Well, hopefully this will teach you that you shouldn't believe every story that you hear."
Gilbert and the Lizard. Eliza disliked Australia. Firstly, she'd had to spend 20 uncomfortable hours on an aircraft getting here. She wanted to go to the beach, but her husband was a zoology professor and wanted to look for some interesting animals, so now she was traversing a swamp in the midday heat. "Let me sit down, Gilbert. I'm not hardy like you," she said eventually. They sat under a tree. There were lots of birds in that secluded rural place, and they watched them flying overhead. Then suddenly Gilbert saw something on a rock. "That's strange," said Gilbert. "That looks like a red swamp lizard, but I thought that species was extinct." He carefully picked it up. "Yes, it is. I'm going to take it back to the Zoology Institute. They will be filled with so much jealousy when they see what I have found." "Are you sure we should take it from its home?" asked Eliza. "Nonsense. Many animals migrate. They're used to changes," said Gilbert. I don't agree with the principle of it," said Eliza. "It isn't ethical." But Gilbert was decisive and took the lizard back to the hotel in the city. He thought that this find would make him a highly esteemed celebrity at the Zoology Institute. For the next few days, Gilbert fed and nurtured the lizard. But the lizard wasn't happy. It lost its beautiful red color and began to look ordinary. In fact, Gilbert started to wonder whether it was special at all. He went outside and found a common lizard on a piece of concrete. When he compared them, they looked exactly alike. The lizard was only red in the swamp. Gilbert said to Eliza, "I'm going to return this lizard to the swamp. I've learned an important lesson. Home is where we are happiest. At home, we are special, like the red lizard. We can never be so happy when we are away." "Good," said Eliza. "So can we go home now?"
The Forest People. Colonel Wilbur and his wife Mary were flying over the tropics in their private plane, but suddenly the engine caught fire. It was impossible to extinguish the fire, so they were forced to land in the forest. "What are we going to do?" said Mary. "Can you fix the plane?" Wilbur said, "That's impossible. I am not a technician, and the plane is out of gasoline. We'll have to find help." Wilbur and Mary walked through the forest. It was difficult to find a path through the trees. Mary even tore her dress on sharp thorns. Suddenly, they saw some huts and lots of miniature people cooking and making weapons with flint. "I'll ask them for help," said Wilbur. "No, don't go. They are deformed," said Mary. "They'll harass us. They may have a contagious virus that will make us sick. We won't know how to cure it. We'll surely end up as corpses." Wilbur tried to persuade Mary to go to the forest people, but she refused to integrate with them. She had the assumption that the small people were dangerous. "Let's keep walking. We're sure to find someone sooner or later." For 3 days, the couple searched, but they found no one who could help them in their crisis. It was uncomfortable, and they were hungry without any source of nutrition. Plus, the forest was filled with dangerous beasts. Finally, Mary agreed to return to the forest people. When Wilbur and Mary arrived at the village, the forest people immediately welcomed them. They gave them bread made from barley to eat and a place to sleep. The next day, the forest people led Wilbur and Mary through the trees, and they promptly arrived at a small town. From there, they took a bus to the city, where they found an embassy. Mary was sorry that she had not trusted the forest people sooner. She learned the value of not discriminating against people who are different.
A dying forest. Rainforests provide much of the world's oxygen supply, but the forest's exotic trees and animals are being killed to make room for farmers and roads. People have been trying to conserve rainforests for years, but another type of forest, the cloud forest, is just as beneficial to humans. Cloud forests are also in danger of disappearing, but little is being done to save them. These forests are located at the tops of mountains, generally near the equator. These humid, wooded mountaintops are mainly in African and Central and South American countries. They are called cloud forests because their height allows for the formation of clouds among the trees. Rainforests produce large amounts of oxygen. Cloud forests produce comparative amounts of water. The trees in these forests pull water out of the clouds. The moisture gathers on the leaves. When it drips, it is deposited into streams. The streams flow into towns at the bottom of the mountain. Then, it's distributed to people. The yearly cumulative rainfall in these areas is 173 to 198 centimeters. Cloud forests can pull in up to 60% of that. This water is crucial to the plants and the people in the area. It helps them survive. Cloud forests are also the birthplace of countless species of plants that can't be found anywhere else. One small cloud forest has the capacity for as many types of plants as there are in all of Europe. There are so many, in fact, that scientists haven't made a comprehensive list of them yet. These forests are being destroyed with increasing frequency. Trees are being cut down, and roads are being built in their place. Some people have an objective to get federal money to protect the forests, but they have had little success. Another strategy is to replace the destroyed plants. That too has been difficult because the plants are so unique. There's plenty of work to be done, but saving the cloud forests is still a possibility.
Thucydides and the Plague of Athens. Thucydides was the world's first historian. Presently, we get most of our knowledge about ancient Greece from his writing. But Thucydides didn't just write about history. He lived through it. However, he almost didn't survive one historical event, the Plague of Athens. In 430 BCE, an army attacked the city of Athens, where Thucydides lived. Thousands of people hid from the army behind Athens' large walls. The city became very crowded as the population expanded. Then, a horrifying disease broke out. People summoned doctors, but it was to no avail because no one understood how the disease spread. It seemed random. They didn't know that it was an organism. Instead, they defined disease as a punishment from their gods. Thucydides was incredulous that gods caused the plague, but he explained why others believed it. There was an old long verse which predicted the disease. To paraphrase it, the verse said the gods would send a disease during a war. As a result, large crowds gathered at shrines to ask the gods to stop the plague. But the situation only worsened. Because these people were so close to each other, they became sick. That's how they learned a fundamental lesson about the plague. It spread from person to person. People wanted to leave the crowded city, but they dreaded what the army outside would do to them. At this time, Thucydides got sick too. He quickly scribbled down notes because he thought he would soon die. His writing shows a stark contrast between people's behavior before and during the plague. There were riots, and people ignored laws. They didn't think they'd live long enough to be punished. Many sick people were left to die in solitude because no one wanted to be near them. The plague lingered for 2 years, but luckily, Thucydides survived. Without his writing, we would know much less about ancient Greece and the Plague of Athens.
The solar car race. We live in a mobile society, but the cars we drive require too much gas, plus they pollute the air. Eventually, the natural resources used to make gas will run out. So what happens then? Many people think solar-powered automobiles are the answer. To learn more about this type of transportation, teams from universities and corporate organizations gather in Australia every 2 years for a solar car race. The race is called the World Solar Challenge. Candidates for this tournament must design their own cars. The teams keep all their plans confidential. They don't interact with other teams because the race is very competitive. And these cars aren't just enhanced and modified versions of normal cars, they are completely different. The cars only have room for one person and are very simple inside. They don't even have a cushion for the driver to sit on. These cars are shorter and much more flat than normal cars. Most importantly, the cars incorporate solar panels onto the outside that lie parallel to each other. These panels are made from materials that take in light from the sun and turn it into electric energy. That's how they move. These cars race over 3,000 kilometers across the Australian territories. The drivers have to heed strict guidelines. They must stop at certain intervals to charge their batteries. And unlike normal race cars, they can't go very fast. They have to drive at the normal speed limits. Although the drivers want to finish the race quickly, that is not the main goal. The objective is to see how well the cars work under normal driving conditions. Because of the World Solar Challenge, a new era in car making and in driving is beginning. People may ridicule the solar cars because they look strange, but this is a phenomenon that isn't going away. Using the technology from the vehicles, car makers will eventually create solar cars for the rest of us.
The heirs. Martin, Paul, and Tom were brothers. They were very different, but they were consistent about two things. They couldn't succeed in business, and they never agreed about anything. Martin was a hard-working farmer, growing organic vegetables and raising poultry. But he was disorganized and forgot to pay his bills. Paul owned a textile factory that produced clothes. He was organized, but he was greedy and took too much clothing. His wardrobe was filled with his own products. Tom was once a sergeant in the army. He ran a martial arts school, but his stance on discipline was too strong. He had almost no students. One day, they received a telegraph saying that their father had died. They were heirs to his old farm. They planned to sell it as soon as possible, so they went to see it, even though there was a terrible storm. The house didn't look great, but there was a lot of land. There was so much, in fact, that they could barely see its boundary. Suddenly, the storm got worse. The sheer force of the wind almost knocked them over. Martin said, "Look, it's a typhoon." Paul said, "No, it's a cyclone." Tom said, "No, it's a tornado." They argued until Paul began to wail and said, "Whatever it is, it's coming right at us. We're doomed." The three brothers scrambled inside the old house. Martin said, "If we survive, we must stop fighting. This farm could be great if we fixed it up. With my hard work, Paul's organization, and Tom's discipline, we could run a great business together." The storm finally ended, and luckily it didn't wreck the farm. "Just think," Martin said. "It took the chaos of a typhoon to bring us together." Paul replied, "You mean a cyclone brought us together?" Tom said, "Didn't I tell you both that it was a tornado?" The brothers never agreed on what kind of storm it was, but by combining their skills, they started a successful farm.
The Little Mice. Beth was a very resourceful and conservative mouse. She knew that winter was coming and that there would soon be a dearth of food, so she decided to make gathering food for winter her primary job. Gathering food was a grueling and mundane activity, but Beth made a deliberate effort because she knew that it was important. She allotted herself a few hours every day to collect beans. By winter, she had collected a massive pile and hid them in a cache. Beth had a sister named Mary. Mary lacked ambition. She had fanciful ideas about how she would survive winter. She thought that food would just come to her and that she could work at her own convenience. She opted to spend the days playing and dancing instead of gathering beans. When the final hours of autumn elapsed, Mary had only a paltry amount of food stored away. Mary realized that her food supply was too small to last through winter. She visited her sister. Mary said, "Beth, I am in a dire situation. I didn't gather enough food for winter. Will you let me share your beans? Please have some empathy for your sister." Beth thought for a moment. Then she replied, "Mary, I am truly sorry for you, but I will not give you any of my beans. Instead, I will let you have my empty bag. You can still work hard and gather enough food for the winter. It will be tedious, but you will learn the value of hard work." Beth's words appalled Mary. Mary cried with outrage. "There is too much work. I won't have any time to dance or play." Beth said, "It is crucial that you gather enough food. You must have sustenance before you have fun. Go now and rectify your situation." Mary griped some more, but she knew that her sister was right. She took the bag and went to work gathering her own beans for the winter.
The Helpful Abbey. It had not rained on the prairie for several months. Because of the drought, the climate had become very arid. There was no moisture left in the soil. No crops could grow in the dry ground. By wintertime, the people had nothing to eat. The hungry families heard about an abbey near the mountains, where food and water was still abundant. So they traveled inland across the prairie to the abbey. At first, only a few families arrived, seeking food and shelter. Then there was ample food. The monks fed them and let them sleep in the small cathedral. Soon, however, more families were arriving every day. These people had to travel farther, so they were in worse condition. The rugged journey had made their clothes ragged. They were cold and tired. The tiny cathedral was soon full. Food became scarce. The monks began to grumble. They began to speculate that there would be no food. "If more families come, we won't make it through the winter," said a young monk. "We must ask some of them to leave." The abbot heard this. "We cannot do that," he said. "It would be wrong to deprive them of food and shelter. We took an oath to help those that need help. All here are in need, so all are eligible to receive our food and shelter." "But we won't have enough," the monk said. "That might be true, but we must help them nonetheless." "We will fast," the abbot replied. "Also, we will give our rooms in the abbey to those sleeping outside, and we will sleep in the churchyard that adjoins the cathedral." The monks were reluctant at first, but they did what the oldest monk said. By the end of the winter, there was still enough food and shelter for everyone. They learned that sometimes helping others means you must give more help than you first expected.
The Bachelor's Lesson. A keen young bachelor had finished his studies at the university. As soon as he had received his diploma, he asserted to everyone he met that he was the smartest person in town. "I excel at everything I study," he said, bragging about his knowledge. "I've mastered calculus and physiology. I even understand the great theoretical teachings of science, such as relativity. There is nothing that I don't know, whether it's the movements of celestial objects like plants and stars, or how to harness the power of radioactive substances. I know everything." But actually, there was something the bachelor did not know. Though his analytic abilities were great, he failed to notice he was missing something very important in his life. One day, while walking through town, the bachelor witnessed a collision between two cars. Both drivers appeared to be injured, but the scholar only stood and watched. He thought to himself, "Those idiots should have been more alert. They really must not be very competent." He never thought the drivers needed help. "Please help me," said the female driver in a weak voice. "Help me too," said the male driver. "I'm hurt and can't move." Suddenly, the bachelor realized he was the only person near the accident. He quit thinking and ran to help the drivers. He carefully helped them out of their vehicles and then called an ambulance. The drivers were saved, and the bachelor felt the best he had in his entire life. Studying mythology, sociology, and geology didn't give him this wonderful feeling. It was the act of helping others, not his cognitive skills, that gave him this great feeling. He had learned an important lesson. He learned that intellect isn't everything. Being helpful is just as important. Having only a brain is not enough, he thought. You must also have a heart.
The corrupt administrator. Mr. Pig was an administrator at a big factory that made different kinds of merchandise. During a meeting at the company's headquarters, his bosses said they wanted the factory to make more money. If the factory makes more money, then you will too, his boss, Mr. Horse, told him. It was a great incentive. Pig had always wanted to be as affluent as his bosses. Mr. Pig returned to the factory and started making changes. However, most were not very nice, and some were not legitimate. First, he fired all his employees. Then he automated the entire factory. Machines now made everything. And the other animals, Mr. Rabbit, Mr. Sheep, and Mr. Dog, had no jobs. Next, he bribed some corrupt senators into legislating special subsidies for the factory. Finally, instead of paying a company to dispose of the factory's rubbish properly, he violated the law by throwing it into the river to save money. At first, all the changes to the factory's infrastructure created more revenue. But soon many stores could no longer sell the factory's goods at retail. It seemed that the machines couldn't make products as well as the workers. The customers were disappointed with the factory's merchandise. There were other problems too. The animals had told their friends and family to stop buying the factory's goods. Officials discovered the factory's rubbish in the river, and when they audited the company, they discovered that Pig had manipulated the law in order to get more money. All transactions with Pig's factory stopped. The factory lost money, and Pig lost his job. He realized his mistakes too late. He had tried to become rich by saving money any way possible. But the cheapest way was not always the best.
A famous accident. One of the greatest pharmaceutical discoveries happened by accident. In his haste to go on vacation, Alexander Fleming had left his laboratory in a mess. The essence of his ongoing work involved a type of bacteria. An infection caused by the bacteria was often terminal, and he was looking for a remedy. He had left the bacteria out while he was away. When he returned from vacation, he found that his lab was covered in fungus. He started cleaning up the mess. While he was cleaning, he had an impulse to examine the fungus. He saw that whenever the fungus was in close proximity to the bacteria died. Though he was a messy scientist, his experiments were precise. He thought that there might be some significance to the fungus. He immediately commenced an experiment to assess what had happened to the bacteria. It had either died by accident or the fungus had killed it. The subsequent tests proved it was the latter reason. What he found astonished him. The fungus actually killed the bad bacteria. All this time, he had been looking for a synthetic material to kill the bacteria. Instead, a common fungus did the job. He knew that something in the fungus had killed the bacteria. His next step was to find those molecules that had done it. When he found them, he extracted them and put them into a pill. The drug proved to be very effective. It also worked against other types of harmful bacteria. The discovery received a lot of publicity. Soon after, the new drug was being used all over the world. Because of the success, the scientist was able to develop even more fabulous drugs to help people. His accidental discovery changed the world and helped save many people's lives.
The island. Where am I? Bob thought to himself when he woke up on a peculiar beach. I can't remember what happened. There had been a bad storm, and Bob's fishing boat sunk. He washed ashore on a small island, but he had gotten hurt during the storm. He had a terrible migraine, and he had a fracture in his shoulder. He felt awful, but he had a strong desire to make it home to his spouse and children. He had to tolerate all the pain and devise a plan. Bob stood up and looked around. I'll walk to a higher altitude so I can see everything around me, thought Bob. Maybe I'll gain some insight about this island and find something to help me escape. As he walked along a mountain ridge, he noticed that the tall indigenous trees looked sturdy and thick. Bob got a brilliant idea. He could build a raft. He cut down some leaves and tree limbs. Even though his shoulder injury impaired his ability to carry the materials, he slowly dragged them down the mountain until he reached the coastline. Bob was a proficient builder. He used his building expertise to line up the limbs and tie them together with long vines. When the raft was finished, Bob was happy with his work. "This will bring me home to my family," he said with a smile. At last, Bob was ready to implement his escape plan. With all his might, he thrust the raft into the water. He climbed on and began the quest to find his way home. Bob smiled again and thought, "I'm glad I kept a good attitude. It prevented the pain from deterring me from my plan. Optimism and ambition make anything possible." Slowly, he floated out to sea. In a few days, he made it to shore and ran home to see his happy family.
Small world. Even though people can't see me, I'm an important part of Earth's biosphere. Scientists who study ecology know that I was the first life form on Earth. There is more of my kind than any other plant or animal in the world. Without me, other plants and animals would not even exist. I am a protist, and my tiny body is made up of one single cell. In my small world, things can be absolutely bizarre. Unlike most aquatic plants and animals, I don't need a temperate climate. I have a very high tolerance for extreme conditions. Right now, I'm swimming around in a bucket of boiling water. The temperature is 150 degrees Celsius, but I feel comfortable. I have coarse hairs called cilia that help me swim around in here. I move my cilia in a repetitive motion for the duration of my swim. I cannot go very fast, though. It takes me about 5 minutes to swim a distance of just 1 millimeter. When I get hungry, I look for tiny, vulnerable parasites. I swim up to one and swallow it whole. I digest things much like people do. I have an organ that works just like a human stomach. After I eat, I release nitrogen gas. Nitrogen is a prominent gas in the Earth's atmosphere. Other plants and animals need my nitrogen to survive. My reproductive ability is my most unique trait. I don't need a companion to mate with. Instead, I undergo a process called fission, where my own nucleus splits in half. An exact copy of my nucleus is made, which forms into another protist. It really is an impressive feat. I can create an infinite number of new protists all by myself.
Becoming a healer. Years ago, I worked at a small health clinic in a remote country. I'd gone there to treat an obscure syndrome. It attacked people's lungs, causing them to need a respirator to breathe. I was trying out a new medication to treat these people instead of using a respirator. If I was successful, I would become famous. Everything was going fine until war broke out in a nearby country. Many people from that country fled the hostile invading army. The army wanted to dominate the people, but the people didn't want to be oppressed. So they walked hundreds of miles across barren land to get away. Some of these people came to our clinic for treatment. I talked with them and learned of their difficulties. They did not beg or complain. I was impressed by their dignity. There was one woman I will never forget. Her son suffered from malnutrition and stomach pain, and she didn't know what to do. Neither did I. I was not adept at treating malnutrition. Nonetheless, when I saw her sadness, I knew I had to help her son. The woman had been feeding her son bread and water. She had a misconception that it would be enough for him. However, I knew that he needed to eat vegetables too. So I took her outside and showed her a dense patch of edible plants. I taught her how to dig up the roots, peel them, and cook them for her son. I explained that she should increase her son's intake of these vegetables. Likewise, she should strive to get him some meat once a week to help him regain his strength. I sent her off with a prescription for some pain medicine, but she also left my office with some new culinary skills. A few weeks later, she returned to tell me her son was healthy again. As thanks, she gave me a beautiful ceramic bowl. I never became famous, but I kept that bowl to remind me what it truly means to heal someone.
The weaving machine. Mr. Joseph Franklin invented a machine that could weave cloth. It wove faster and straighter than anyone could weave by hand. He decided to take it to 2 cities on a peninsula, Netherton and Wilton. In these cities, a large proportion of the people worked in weaving. Joseph felt sure he could sell his machine there. Joseph first took his machine to the mayor of Netherton. "Think of the money you will earn from this machine," Joseph said to him. But the mayor was a benevolent man. He knew about the people's dependence on weaving for their livelihood. If he bought the machine, the people would lose their jobs, so he refused to buy it. Joseph said, "We are no longer in the medieval age. Soon everything will be made by machines. Cloth made by hand will soon be obsolete. If you don't change your archaic ways, your town's income will diminish." But the mayor said, "I don't like capitalism. Don't impose your radical ideas on my town. Go away." So Joseph took his machine to the mayor at Wilton. This mayor thought Joseph's machine was spectacular and spent a long time looking at its different components made of brass. The mayor couldn't refute the fact that the machine had drawbacks that would affect the people's jobs, but he realized the machine could bring money and prestige. So he ordered Joseph to build 20 of them. Within a year, Wilton was a wealthy city, famous for its wonderful cloth. People no longer wove, but worked in managerial jobs at cloth factories instead. Nobody bought the cloth from Netherton anymore. The people of Netherton became poor and hungry. Finally, the mayor of Netherton called Joseph and said, "Now I realize that your machine is not just a passing fad. To succeed in business, we must be willing to change." He then ordered 20 weaving machines. After that, both Netherton and Wilton became rich cities, famous throughout the land for their wonderful cloth.
Life on the farm. Bill was an excellent capitalist. He financed a large aviation enterprise that made a lot of money. He knew how to maximize monetary gains in every business deal he made. Bill had one big problem, though. He was unhappy all the time. Bill knew that he had to do something about it, or he would be depressed for the rest of his life. One day, Bill was in his office when he heard a knock at the door. "Come in," Bill said loudly. His accountant, Jane, walked in. Jane said, "Sir, I haven't seen you smile in a year. What are you so sad about? Your company is doing very well." Bill told her, "I'm indifferent about my company's success. I have contempt toward my job. I just want to do something I enjoy. I've always loved growing plants as a hobby. I'm going to quit my job and become a farmer." "You're crazy," Jane said. "I don't think so," Bill replied. "I want the simplicity of a life on a farm. I'm tired of all this stress. Farming will make me happy." The very next day, Bill carried out the preliminary task of buying land and tools. Then he got to work. He sowed many types of seeds. He planted soy, cabbage, carrots, and onions. The upcoming summer is going to be very dry, thought Bill. I need to irrigate my crops as a precaution, in case it doesn't rain enough. He took his spade and dug a ditch down the middle of his farm. Water from the stream will flow down the ditch and saturate the soil around every plant, Bill thought. Bill dedicated himself to farming. After a year, his farm looked exquisite. Most importantly, Bill was happy. He finally had the life he always wanted.
Beethoven's gift. Beethoven was a great composer of classical music in the 1800s. Many biographies have been written that narrate his dominance in the music world. But do you know what really makes him special? Even though millions of people got to hear his multiple masterpieces, he never did. Beethoven wrote his best pieces after he went completely deaf. His partiality toward classical music developed when he was very young. He wasn't interested in anything else as a child. When he was 5, he learned how to play the piano. From then, nothing could stop his passion for writing and playing music. When Beethoven was 20, he began to lose his hearing. He got acute, spontaneous pains in his ears. His hearing kept getting worse over time. It was inevitable that he would eventually lose it altogether. It was very hard for him to keep writing music. He lost the virtue of patience, and he became notorious for his aggression. Still, he never stopped trying. His passion for music compelled him to keep performing, even after he went deaf. He couldn't hear himself play, but he knew that his creations sounded gorgeous. His final concert was held at a huge banquet. He gave the musicians a cue, and they began to play. He directed the concert with all his heart. He couldn't hear the music, but he said that he could feel it. The overall performance was one of the finest in history. When it was over, he turned to the crowd. They clapped and cheered wildly. In that beautiful moment, the applause boosted his emotions and he began to cry. In 1827, he suffered from lead poisoning. He didn't survive the sickness, but his music did, because great music never becomes outdated. Even though Beethoven is gone, his legacy will live on forever.
Brothers. John and Mark were brothers, but they were quite different people. Mark looked very masculine. He had a mustache and was very muscular. He was a sculptor. He made things out of stone. Mark was a good artist, but he was not very intelligent. John looked nothing like his brother. He was small and weak, but he was very smart. John was an undergraduate in college, and he studied anthropology and history. He knew a lot about ancient cultures. The brothers loved each other very much, but they thought they had nothing in common. One day, the mayor appointed Mark to build a monument, a statue of Egyptian pharaoh Tut. Mark agreed to do the job, but he had a problem. He had no idea who Pharaoh Tut was. However, he thought he had the competence to build a good statue anyway. He made some crude measurements and sculpted a statue of a very old man with a tattoo on his chest. Mark was proud of his work, but when John saw the statue, he laughed aloud. "What's so funny?" Mark asked. John replied, "Your ignorance makes me laugh. Don't you know that Tut was only a teenager when he was pharaoh? Let me help you. I'll supervise your work. I'll give you feedback, and we'll make this a great monument." Mark got another cube of stone. John told him what Tut looked like. "Make him tall with good posture," John said, "and make sure there is symmetry in his body." Mark conferred with John about every detail. For 10 consecutive hours, the brothers worked. At last, the finished statue was situated in front of the museum. Everyone applauded the brothers' good work. "We worked together very well. I guess we are compatible after all," Mark said. John replied, "I agree. When we combine our talents, we are capable of greatness."
The Old Hound. Elvis was a dog that loved to run. He possessed all the criteria to be a great racing dog. He had long legs, lean muscles, and a strong heart. He was so good that he never lost a race in the Northern Hemisphere. Spectators who bet on dog races always picked Elvis to win. After 10 years of racing, however, Elvis was getting old. His faculties were not as strong as they used to be. His owner got upset when Elvis started losing. Elvis's owner wasn't a considerate person. He degraded the dog all the time. Finally, his owner decided to get rid of him. He threw Elvis in his car and took him to the middle of the forest. He tossed him out and drove away. Elvis was cold and scared. He decided to follow a brook into the city. Elvis soon found out that the city was a big and impersonal place. Everywhere he went, he saw signs that said, "No dogs allowed." Pedestrians yelled at him. He was sad, hungry, and alone. He thought that all people were as cruel and uncaring as his owner had been. He was ready to give up when he heard a soft voice say, "What a beautiful hound." Elvis looked up and saw an old woman. She said, "You're entitled to a better life than this. I can take you to a sanctuary for old dogs like you. I'll cater to all your needs. Would you like to come with me?" The woman escorted Elvis to a beautiful facility. There was a sign on the external door that said, "Dogs Welcome." The interior of the building was painted blue, and shiny ornaments hung from the ceiling. There was a heap of tasty bones and bread crusts for consumption. Elvis learned there were kind people in the world after all. He was so thankful that he jumped up and licked the woman's face.
Day without sight. On Friday afternoon, Sam's teacher had a special assignment. Next week, we'll be studying humanitarian efforts around the world since the time of the Renaissance, including those to help the blind, she said. Over the weekend, I want each of you to wear a blindfold for an entire day. The premise of this experiment is that it will help you understand what it's like to be blind, she said. Sam was a skeptic. He really didn't think the assignment would be too challenging. On Saturday morning, Sam took a piece of cloth and tied it around his head to cover his eyes. Then he went into the kitchen for breakfast. He heard the voices of his parents and brothers, but couldn't specify where each voice was coming from. He thought about how important hearing is for blind people. "Could you pass me the newspaper, please?" he asked. Just then, He remembered he couldn't see the words on the page. He wondered if Braille newspapers were ever made. After finishing breakfast, his brothers asked him to play soccer. As he followed them, he accidentally walked into the baker's rack. He also found that he couldn't play soccer. He wouldn't be able to coordinate his actions without being able to see. Without his optic senses, he had no spatial awareness. Furthermore, he couldn't do simultaneous activities because he had to make sure he was safe first. He sat on the lawn. Suddenly, he realized that though he couldn't see, his other senses worked perfectly fine. In fact, he began to realize new and different aspects of common objects. For example, he took a flower bud and felt it with his finger. He realized for the first time that it seemed to be covered with wax. His hypothesis about being blind was disproved. The informative experiment had an imprint on him. It showed him sight was an asset that should be appreciated and taught him to revere the talents of blind people.
The Big Ship. Ernest looked at his fleet of ships. Usually he used them for his firm, which imported marble statues from other countries. But today he was going fishing, and the ship he chose was his favorite. It had an elaborate painting on the side that showed a naval battle. It also had some new updates to its computer system. His favorite ship's latest acquisition was a device with a small grid to show the ship's exact location. This new accessory kept Ernest from getting lost. At daybreak, Ernest happily sailed the temperate waters until he was far from land. Then he saw a small boat in the distance. There was an old man standing next to its mast. He was waving his arms in the air. There was also a boy with his head hanging over the boat's edge. Ernest inferred that the boy was suffering from nausea. Both of their clothes were saturated with seawater. Ernest assumed that they were in trouble. Most people never realized, but Ernest had an innate desire to help people. He began sailing toward them, eager to facilitate their rescue and thus solve their dilemma. As he got closer to the boat, he was shocked by its simplicity. The boat's wood looked no stronger than cardboard, and the equipment was old. Still, there were several large fish in a pouch in the boat. Ernest threw a large package onto the boat. He yelled, "Here, you can inflate this boat to get you back to land." "Get out of here," screamed the old man. Ernest was confused. "Don't you need help?" he asked. "Your ship doesn't seem adequate enough to sail so far away from land." "You've just scared away a huge fish," the boy said. "We waved to let you know you were too close to us." Ernest turned around and headed home. He learned that it's better not to help unless asked to. Otherwise, you might not help anyone at all.
The history of parachutes. Scientists who study archaeology say that there may be some evidence of prehistoric parachutes. But the first written history of the device comes from China about 2,100 years ago. Scientists cite an ancient book that describes parachutes. However, there is no archaeological evidence that proves that an actual parachute was ever made. Later, people from northern Africa and Italy also had ideas about a similar invention. In fact, a Leonardo da Vinci drawing corresponds closely with the modern parachute design. In 1783, French scientist Sébastien Lenormand invented the first modern parachute. Sébastien brainstormed with other scientists to come up with a way to help people jump safely out of burning buildings. He thought the solution was to give people an object to restrict their speed while they traveled toward the ground. Many people thought that he was up to some kind of fraud, but Sébastien had a lot of integrity. His budget was limited, so he first tested his theory by using 2 umbrellas. He jumped out of a tree and found that the umbrellas worked. Next, he refined his invention. Rather than using umbrellas, he knit a large parachute. Finally, he jumped off a tall building on a French estate and landed safely in the courtyard. Sébastien's work gave another man an idea. Jean-Pierre Blanchard had a different outlook than Sébastien. He was a hot air balloon addict. He was one of the first people to ride in a hot air balloon powered by hydrogen gas. He was a proponent of using the parachutes to exit from hot air balloons. Starting in 1785, he used his dog to show that animals could land safely from hot air balloons by using parachutes. Then in 1793, he was faced with a chaotic experience. The hot air balloon he was riding in burst and started to fall. He was forced to use a parachute himself, and much to his relief, it saved his life.
I didn't do it. Billy was in big trouble. The day before, a donor gave the school a painting with a sports theme. It showed a referee congratulating two athletes. The principal hung the painting in front of the office, hoping that it would be a stimulus for students to play sports. The next morning, however, the painting was destroyed. There was graffiti on it, and it had many holes in it. The worst part was that one of Billy's fellow students said she thought she saw Billy do it. But Billy didn't do it. The principal called Billy's parents and said, "Billy won't tell us the truth. He's a chronic liar, and he ruined the painting. If you don't pay for it, we'll terminate his education here." Billy's parents didn't have enough money to pay for the painting and for his tuition. But Billy's parents had an idea. That afternoon, they went to see Mr. Myers, an attorney. "Mr. Myers, my son has been implicated in a crime he says he didn't do," Billy's father said. "Everybody believes the gossip. Even some of our own kin think he did it." "I believe you. My suspicion is that the tape from the security cameras will show who really did it," said Mr. Myers. The next day, Mr. Myers received a packet with the videotape from the school. It showed another student who resembled Billy walking up to the painting and writing on it. Then, the student took a knife by the shaft and started to stab large holes in it. Finally, he severed the rope that held up the painting and it fell to the floor. Mr. Myers showed the tape to the principal. "Clearly, that's not Billy," he said. "This boy is actually responsible and needs some discipline." Billy was happy that someone believed him. He said to Mr. Myers, "When I graduate and go to university, I will major in law so I can be a guardian of justice like you."